Robbie, since we were already talking about you, and you kind of get, we all get interesting mail and comments. I think I just got one that I won't get into right now, but you had one, Robbie, that you shared with us in our group chat, and it got us all thinking. So, would you tell us about that?
Sure. Yeah, first I'll just say we love comments. So whether it's on our Substack platform, whether it's directly on YouTube, and just reminding everyone you can comment directly on YouTube as well. And we are monitoring those comments. And so we're going to bring one in just to kind of kick things off that said, they're a fan, love it, but finding themselves feeling a little jaded, just by the constant, you won't believe what just happened now, and same thing day after day after day, kind of a Groundhog Day experience, and worried about getting caught up in the negativity, I think, of that, and not being able to sort of think about what do we do? How can we manage the chaos? How can we manage our own, responses to it, and try to get to do something productive in the meantime. So that's kind of one we thought we'd just start off with. And I should say too that we are going to spend most of the time today taking your questions, your comments. So if you want to put those, actually, if you could kind of put those in the Q&A thing so we can keep them separate from the chat, that would really help us. So go ahead and put those there. We're going to get to that in about 20 minutes. But in the chat, please do introduce yourselves, tell us where you're from, and you can kind of keep a running commentary. It's always really interesting to see what's happening there with each other in the chat. So that's the first thing that kind of came across to me. And Jamar, you said you got a couple of the comments as well.
Yeah, it's I get it, right? Like we are under a fascist regime, and when the four of us get on the mic, we're talking about it. And for me, and I'll just speak for myself, everybody can speak for themselves. There's two things that come up. Number one, this is the ratio. uh, Most of the news that's happening, particularly on the political side, is bad. That's not to say all of it, but a preponderance, especially from the federal level, is bad stuff going on. One of the things that's been remarkable to me is that scholars of authoritarianism are saying, yeah, this checks all the boxes, but what they also say is what is surprising to them is how rapidly it's happening, how quickly we're going down this road. So we're just calling balls and strikes, as the saying goes, and the reality is a lot of it is negative. The other motivation that I have for bringing this up is it still is incredibly frustrating how few people seem to be aware of what's really going on and how dire it is. So the folks who would tune into the convocation, you're more informed, I would say, than the general populace. And so you are getting this volume of information that it seems negative and bad all the time because you're actually paying attention. But one of the things that I think all of us have mentioned in various circumstances is how frustrating it is when you're interacting with people who think, who A, don't know what's going on at all because they just got their heads in the sand and aren't paying attention, or B, are minimizing it and saying that we're all chicken littles and screaming the sky is falling, and actually it's not that bad. So as for me, part of the motivation is to address those twin issues. One, this is the news that's coming out, and two, there are still so many people who are way behind on knowing what the heck's going on. But I'll be interested to hear other thoughts on that. Kristen, you're dealing with this all the time. You sort of have remarked how you feel bad sometimes when you're speaking to groups and you bring so much uh, negative no's. How are you navigating this?
Yeah, I'm surprised people keep inviting me because I'm always a bit of a downer. Um, I I don't know what to say except first of all, for the three of the four of us who are historians here, historians tend to be critics. And we're also, very aware, and Robbie's an honorary historian. He,
Hey, I'll take it.
right? I mean, the stories from the past, right? They do bring lessons, And often those lessons come in the form of, you don't want to do this. This is what happens when you do this. This is what happens when you don't do this, right? And so, I think that we all have eyes to see, and we want to communicate that out. But I mean, the truth is, there is very little that one person can do. Sometimes one person can change history. More often, a small group of people can change history, but only if they know what's going on, right? So I think part of our motivation here is to tell as many people what's going on, in as much as we understand what's going on, to give people the tools. And we don't know which people are going to do the thing that leads to the other thing that leads to the other thing that ultimately changes history, because that is how history works,
Mm.
right? That's how history plays out. And you don't know what that thing is, and you don't know who's going to do the thing. And it's often very surprising. So I think that's part of what we're doing here, is just feeling the burden of sharing what it is that we know, because we have eyes to see. Um, that said, yeah, it can be, it can lead to despair. And if you follow me on Substack, you'll see a pattern. There's doom and gloom. There is, and honestly, those are some of my more popular posts. And then I always balance them. Sometimes every other, at least every two or three, with messages of hope, because if you're just despairing, you're not going to be in a place to do the things that might spark the other things. And so we can find hope. Certainly we can find hope in understanding the goodness that persists despite the darkness that surrounds us, right? And so it's kind of this back and forth, this give and take. And depending on the day, you might get one or the other from me. Depending on the day, you might need to hear one or the other, right? And I think that could vary for every single one of us here.
So we'll go to Robbie and then you, Diana. I totally resonate with that, Kristen. It's going to be both. The ratio may not be equal, but we do need to cultivate moments or spaces of hope, and really, I think just perspective, to understand that, yeah, it's really hard to make change on a large scale, and you kind of keep putting stuff out there, information out there, hoping that the right people will latch onto it and take action. And that could be some of y'all tuning in and listening. What about you, Robbie? What were your thoughts when you got that message, or you're the one who's first read it?
Yeah, well, I totally appreciate it. And the I think the balance thing is really important. And I think we all have to try to find that in our own lives. And that can also mean um, you know, just going to a baseball game, right? It can mean kind of taking a step back with family, friends, and those kinds of things as well. And I think we've got to find the rhythm. I got another note just today from a fellow writer who said he's just having to take a month off for his mental health.
Mm.
And I wrote him back and I said, good for you. That is totally right. This is a marathon. Hand the baton over. It'll be here for you when you come back. Right. Yeah, absolutely. Do that. And I think one of the things that holding this space together, I hope, is doing is all helping us hang in there. Right. Because there is some comfort, I think, too, in realizing like, okay, I'm not the only one seeing this. I'm not the only one worried about this. I'm not, you know, overreacting, especially, if you're, I put a note in there. I used to live in Springfield, Missouri. And hello, folks from Springfield. Thanks for being here. And, I remember that, it felt like sometimes a different world, right, from some of the national news that I would see. And there was a different kind of bubble there. My family is still in Jackson, Mississippi. Whenever I go home there, it definitely feels like a bubble and a different world that's disconnected. And even when I talk with my parents and stuff and say, no, actually, when we went to see the Washington Spirit play the women's professional soccer team last weekend, and as we got off the metro, there were these clusters of always in fours, armed to the teeth National Guard units in full fatigues with M16s strapped to their chests, just randomly standing on the street corners between the metro and the ball field. And then my son went, into town, into the city to meet some friends. And I said, look, if you get on the metro and you see anyone get on that is not in uniform with a bulletproof vest on and it says ICE or Homeland Security, I want you to just quietly get off the car and wait for the next train. Like, and I've never had to tell my kids like that, about law enforcement. But in this is real, right? And it's particularly real in DC. And if you're in Chicago, as probably some people here, it may be real very, very soon in Chicago as well.
Thank you for that, and thank you for bringing the comment. I mean, I think it says a lot about you and the spirit that we're trying to cultivate in this show, that we get a comment like that, and you didn't take a defensive posture. You said, okay, this is information that we need to hear, and we wanted to make space to respond to it. And as was said earlier, we do read these comments. I'll read a few at the end of our time today, and so keep them coming on whether on Substack or the YouTube channel. And also want to remind you quickly again, use the Q&A box. We've got 12 questions so far, and with 250 people signed on, I know there are more. So keep them coming, and we're going to leave ample time to respond to some of those questions as we go further. But Diana, what are your thoughts?
One of the things I thought when Robby first shared the comment with us all was like, well, what do people expect? It's been a all terrible summer if you're paying attention to the news. And the honest truth of it is we're 4 human beings, and we're as shocked and overwhelmed as anybody else, despite the fact that we can talk about these things and we have some level of expertise in them from various angles. It doesn't mean that we aren't feeling them. And it doesn't mean that we don't need each other in order to process what's going on. So some of what you hear on this podcast is literally us trying to figure it out with one another, feeling as overwhelmed, honestly, as you all. And so I think that's really important for all of us to keep in mind right now. There is no expert who can solve all these problems or wave some magic wand right now and make all this go away. The best we can be is, a friend of mine always used to say, we're just human beings on the same bus. And that's how I think about this right now. And so when you hear us talk, we really are unscripted. We haven't gotten together to try to plan how to make you feel better in advance, because we ourselves might not be feeling better. So that was kind of my first take. And then it is also helpful to know that we each have sort of natural dispositions and our own experiences in dealing with traumatic and scary stuff. And, for years and years and years, I was known as the hope lady. And it's actually kind of scary to me because it puts a lot of pressure on you when you walk into a room and everybody's like looking at you really eagerly to make them feel better. And I remember, probably about 2 years ago, when I walked into some room where another friend of mine was, I could say her name actually, Julie Ingersoll, who teaches about Christian nationalism and has been for almost 30 years. And she said, the only time she was really upset is when she saw me be without hope. And I thought, oh my gosh, that's one of my best friends, saying that to me. And so, we each bring who we are to this moment. And for me, that's generally an optimistic and hopeful person. And so when I am without hope, I know that really upsets people around me. And I'm really sorry. I wish there was something I could do about that. But I'm just being honest about who I am. And I know that my friends here too, that they're working out of who they are very honestly. And you're really seeing parts of us here that are deeply genuine and forthright. And in doing that, we're actually taking risks. And I would ask people to hold on to that for just a second, is that we're trying to find safety and our own footing while we're actually doing something that's kind of risky, because we're trying to model for you all and encourage you all how to do the same in your settings, how to really talk to people, how to share with people honestly, how to bring your whole self into this difficult moment, and to tell the truth in the best ways that you know how. And so if we kind of lose the thread on that once in a while, it's because this is just a really hard moment. And we're doing the best we can. And we hope that you all are doing the best you can as well. And I guess my only sort of moment of sort of hopefulness is this summer I've thought a lot about how many centuries in the history of Christianity have gone by. And in most of those centuries, most people who were Christians were living in situations of unfreedom, lack of liberty, minimal sense of personal fulfillment, genuine danger, and other kinds of historical moments that were not pleasant in any way, shape, or form, where there was real risk, real pain, and life was short, brutish, and nasty. I think that was the three words. And so that's actually given me a little bit of that historical hope back, because those people in those centuries didn't give up, and they did astonishing things with their lives, created astonishing beauty, wrote astonishing books, raised their children the best they could, built families and towns and houses, and just did their work with faithfulness. And so that's kind of restored a little bit of, I guess, maybe the Hope Lady, who I hope can show up at least a little bit this fall.
Well,
I've seen that in my I'm not the Hope Lady. Never ever have I been confused for the Hope Lady. In fact, at the end of every presentation, almost invariably, I'm given this like desperate question from either the host or an audience member, like, can you give us some hope? Just a little bit. My editor made me rewrite the end of Jesus and John Wayne to give just a little bit of hope. I'm sure that's going to happen again in this next book. But I found helpful historians of the civil rights movement in thinking about this question of hope. And Tim Tyson has this essay on the subject of essentially, like, no, hope often isn't found in history. Very, very rarely does it surface. And that's really great when it does. But I think it kind of depends on, the kind of history that you write, the kind of history that you immerse yourself in. And it's not that there isn't hope there, but the hope doesn't come from the history lessons. Now, in the civil rights movement, there was change. That can be a source of hope. But the people living in that moment, the people working for generations, like decades and decades, they weren't sensing the hope. What was right in their face was the violence, the ever-present threat, the deaths, right? The assault on their dignity, on their families, on their children. And they persisted. Jamar, I wonder if you could speak to that at all. And, what kind of resilience can you bring us? Can the past bring us voices from the past, and maybe help us understand, maybe a different kind of hope, maybe a little bit more of a grittier kind of hope?
Oh, that's so good. I love being on here with historians and honorary historians. Barbara
You're gonna
just
give
made.
me a little badge or something at some point, right?
We'll get you your historian card.
Yeah.
Um, Barbara made the comment, I believe hope is a verb, not a noun. And I just think that's so important. I think even us getting on the mic is an act of hope.
Yeah.
But Kristen, you talked about, what are some lessons from history? I did kind of try to write a book on this. Oh, and by the way, it's really good timing. And we didn't even plan this. This is unscripted. But the Spirit of Justice turned 1 year old this week. Actually, the release day was yesterday, so the anniversary was yesterday. So this is the subtitle is True Stories of Faith, Race, and Resistance. And the funny part is, I always in my mind confuse resistance with resilience. Like it could have been either of those words. Um, One of the things we should remember about the civil rights movement is this is coming at the tail end of nearly a century of Jim Crow. And the only reason it's the tail end is you have a movement to end it. So for decades, from essentially right after the Civil War to the 1960s, essentially, you have legalized segregation, you have lynching, you have all sorts of exclusions. Like, one of the things that we have to understand about that era is it's not just the actual physical violence, it's the exclusion that was happening where Black people couldn't join unions, women couldn't even vote till 1920, right? Like, all of this is happening. So what do you do then? There's not there's they lynchings were happening so often. The NAACP had a flag that said a man was lynched today. That is, they would put out every time another one happened. That's how frequently you're hearing about these things. And how do people keep going? It's all the basics. It was local, it was community, it was faith. But one thing they didn't do was deny what was happening. As a matter of fact, here's the interesting thing you learn when you study history. It's the people who were most immersed in the bad news who became the people who brought good news. Not just the gospel. I'm just talking about hope. These were for example, and I'll end it. Fannie Lou Hamer, who I always talk about. But think about this. She was born and raised in Sunflower County, Mississippi, the Delta. I lived in the Delta on the Arkansas side. For Mississippi and for Arkansas, it's the poorest region of the state, and it's the region of the state with the highest concentration of Black people. She was born the 20th of 20 children. They had to wear rags on their feet. Sometimes all they had for dinner was flour mixed with fat to make a sort of gravy. And she married a sharecropper. She had nothing earthly going for her. And so it's a place of crushing despair. And yet, at church, she hears from these civil rights activists, voting rights activists, and she volunteers to go to register to vote, where she was turned away at gunpoint just to register to vote. And isn't it so interesting that the places of deepest despair generate the groups and the individuals who have the strongest hope? But they didn't do that by turning away from what was happening. They leaned in.
Mark, that actually reminds me of one of the things we saw yesterday. It's a different setting, but the young women who have brought these charges against the Epstein estate and are insisting that we get the files released about that. I mean, those are women who have been through some of the worst possible human abuse and darkness, being traded as sexual slaves, essentially, by really rich men who abused their bodies and their souls and then discarded them. And so they do not they have not turned away from the evil that was done from them, yet can stand in public and shine a light. And if you watch that whole press conference like I did, it was very painful. It was deeply wrenching. There were people who were crying. But at the same time, those women were standing in power and claiming the possibility of real change and holding the powerful to account. And so ultimately, the people who told the deepest truth and had the worst experiences were also the ones who brought the greatest vision of transformation, which might even be a better word than hope at this point.
I'm so glad you brought them up, Diana, because yes, if you haven't watched that press conference or even a portion of it, start there. And you're right, like those who have known the greatest darkness are speaking most powerfully into this, and they should not have to. It should not have gotten to this point that those victims who have already had so much taken away from them. The testimony of Marina I want to make sure I get this right, Lacerda, the Brazilian woman, who told her story, and what she said is like what was done to her. Like if you know victims of sexual abuse, this is familiar. Like took her memories away. It was hard for her to piece together. She was so young at the time, working 3 jobs, trying to support her family, her immigrant family. And she said, I want those documents because I want to piece my memories back together. Right? I mean, that's the level of personal loss. And these are the women who are standing up, and they know the cost in doing this. Many of the women who were speaking yesterday have never spoken publicly about this. And they are stepping up in this moment, knowing what the cost is likely to be. So listen to them and then figure out what's the equivalent for the rest of us, right? There are so many models of courage if you just look for them.